Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the BuzzStream podcast. My name is Vince Nero. I'm your host, and today we are talking with Libby Windle and Eirini Theodoridou, and both from Connective 3. And we are going to be talking all about international digital PR. It's something I don't have a lot of experience with, so I'm really excited to chat about it today. I'm going to do a lot less chatting, hopefully. I am getting over a cold, so you don't have to hear me sound like a monster. But before we get into it, I just want to remind people to like, subscribe, share this stuff with your colleagues. The more you do, the more I can have great guests on, like Libby and Eirini. Second reminder to check out List IQ, our media list building tool that's powered by AI, but helps you build super relevant lists right from Google News in a fraction of the time that it takes you to do all the manual research typically required when you are building a list right from Google News. It brings in things like author bios, tells you if they're still active at the campaign or at the publication. It's really great, and it's getting some really great feedback. So love for you all to check it out. All right, let's get into this. Libby and Eirini, how you doing?
Pretty good.
Very good.
How are you?
We're good. We're a little frozen out here, but and like I said, I'm getting over a cold. So we have a interesting setup here. We're doing a two-person interview. So I'm going to do my best to throw these questions to you both. But we're talking about international markets, building a team, and pitching. I want to start with kind of the building a team portion of this, because obviously that typically comes first for a lot of people. Can you, Libby, I guess, could you just give me kind of a quick background on how Connective 3 kind of got into this? Was this something that you always did? Were you typically UK first? But yeah, tell me kind of where you're at the process.
Yeah, of course. It's a lengthy one. So yeah, we were typically a UK agency. But actually, so back in 2020, we started running campaigns within the UK, obviously, but then also on a US scale. So saw huge successes from that. And then we started working in Europe towards the back end of 2020. We were working with a couple of UK-based clients, brands that were wanting to expand across Europe. And then one of them was a finance brand where we did a campaign looking into the best places to retire. And that was across European market. So from that data, we obviously did the UK outreach and some European outreach as well. And we saw massive successes from doing that. And then from there, it just kind of excelled and grew. So that's kind of when we've been doing it since 2020.
Yeah, and Eirini, I mean, your role is head of international PR. Have you been with Connective 3 for this whole time?
Yeah, actually, I joined 2021. Yesterday was my 5-year anniversary.
Congrats. All right.
But yeah, to be fair, it was organically about to happen. When I joined, I was working on UK accounts. I started as an exec. It's not a size fits all, but most agencies, you start as an exec and then you move up with different roles. But there was a need on more links and more publications covering topics like the UK publications are. And it was really fertile environment to create a team because we did have natives. I was one of the first non-UK people who joined the team, but I was focusing on the UK market, and then I could see the value. We had so many campaigns, but you could get the same data for different markets. Yes, I'm Greek native, but I could see the value there. And so I saw it happening organically, to be fair. And then I was throughout the years, I jumped into a more senior role. And
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So I get a lot of questions about this. Typically, I'll get comments on and the webinars I do, questions about this kind of stuff. Like, does the pitching change? Do the ideas change? And we'll get into that a little bit, but I'd love to hear, I guess, Eirini, from you. So you mentioned something there that I thought it was interesting. This idea of like, you have data that you can easily kind of just replicate across, different countries. What typically comes first? Is it the idea, or is it we have a client who wants to get more coverage internationally? I mean, is it the kind of thing where it's nice to get a campaign that spreads across multiple countries because you're just getting more links and coverage? Or do you have people that come to you specifically from Germany and they just want, links in Germany, that sort of thing?
I think in the beginning, I think it was the other way around. Now we have brands reaching out for specific links in specific markets to break specific into specific markets. Germany is a big one, as you mentioned, and the DACH countries in general. Not just Germany, but Austria and Czech Republic. But I would say in the beginning, it was more into we have the data, we have the opportunity. Why not get publications covering with the ADR over 50 and 60, so really high value publications covering our data from different markets. Yes, some of them have English speaking articles in their publications, but even non-English articles have obviously drive value. We know it's still traffic, but we now I think it's more important for brands to break into the market so they know the value of getting natives, working with natives, getting someone who understands the market, not just mindlessly pitching a random UK data set that might have, let's say, Romanian data as well, and pitching to Romania, but actually creating data sets specifically to the market, understanding the regions, understanding the localization of the market. And that's the main change in the past, I would say, 2 years. But in the beginning, 2020, 2021, we mostly had the data that just pushed us into our outreach into these markets because the data was already.
Right.
I think that's key to kind of elevate on that as well, that we do work with a real mix of clients with different focuses. So like Eirini said, we've got clients who have got campaigns and data where they're wanting to get more eyes on the research. So they'll have indexes with data relevant to their own market and then wider markets, so the US, Europe. So the brief of that is to get more eyes on the campaign, so outreach far and wide. And then we've got specific clients where they are just wanting to dominate the DACH region, the French market, the Spanish market. So then from that, they will also operate within those markets. So we will run specific campaigns for that brand within those specific markets. So it's a real mix.
And I think now they understand the value of you're not actually just building links in the market. It might be a UK brand, a US brand that wants to actually drive revenue from specific markets, launch a product, launch their service in the specific market, let's say the DACH region. So you're acting like consultants to the market and link builders because they wouldn't
Right.
understand, let's say if they were finance service, they would understand how Germans, for example, understand trading. Because it's not something that would just create nice data-led stories that the journalists will like, but also understanding the value of keeping the people in the market, let's say the German market, in the know of what exactly the service is, and if they would actually like to trade, what the Germans think about this.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the major, I think, points I've been trying to drive home lately is this idea that like your journalists, your target journalists, your target publications should drive a lot of how, your strategy. If you want to get links from specific publications, you have to understand what they write about, what types of things, how they write and what types of topics. So you spoke a little bit, I think, Eirini, well, you both actually said this idea of like having natives on your team, people who are native to the region that you're doing outreach and ideation. Libby, I'd love to hear you kind of elaborate a little bit more on how you go about doing that and building a team with this in mind.
Yeah, of course. So I think for us, the key to our success that we've seen is that whichever market we operate in, we've got the expertise in-house to be able to help us grow within that market. So understand the consumers, the media, which is vital for success. So we do a lot of work, like Eirini said, across the DACH region. So we've actually got a German PR team within C3. So we've got a German PR lead and we've got strategists and execs. They know the market, they know the journalists, they know the brands, they know how to speak to consumers, they know what works. So we really lean on them for their expertise. And that's how we've seen our success across the DACH market, which we then replicated across other markets. So for example, France, Spain, Italy, and so on. So that is really, really key, I think, to build a successful international team, making sure that you've got those experts internally that are natives within that market that you're wanting to kind of grow and expand in. And I think as well, people buy into people, and it's same with brands, brands buy into people. So when we're speaking to brands that are wanting to kind of maybe launch in a new market or run PR campaigns in a new market, if we've got natives of that market with us and they're helping us have those conversations, I think that builds more trust with the brand and the kind of the sector that we're talking to at that stage.
Are you specifically going out and finding people that live in those? Like, do they work at C3 in the office with you, or are they?
So when we speak about international at C3, one point that we always make is that although we've got an international presence and international team, they all operate from the UK, so we're not dotted all over the world. So yeah, they're all working outside of our London, Manchester and Leeds office. But obviously at Connective 3, we have got one of the perks whereby you can work from anywhere abroad. So I think that's been really crucial to how we've built that team. So for example, we've got kind of people from France working for C3, so they can go back home to France, spend time with their family and work without having to dip into their holidays. So I think that's been like a vital perk for us to be able to grow our international team as well. For example, you was in Greece last week, but you were still able to work. So yeah, they're all within the UK. We're not all over the world, but sometimes we are all over the world when we are working from other areas
I
outside
remember
of the UK.
before we got this benefit and we were building, when I first joined, I was the only non-UK and person in the team. And then we built this work from abroad scheme, which was actually mostly used the first few years from non-nationals, but now most people use it. Like it's
Yes.
such a good perk. And I would say the reason we were able maybe to build this big team of internationals, it's we have to thank the brain drain from other European countries, especially because we have obviously I came here for studies because of the educational system and the economy, but I know most people, follow suit from different countries as well. So it's nice to be able to go back home like you would go on the weekend to see your family, like from there for a few weeks, but it definitely has helped to have this flexibility.
So yes, we're all
Yeah.
at the moment, but who knows what the future holds.
Well, so, Eirini, can you speak a little bit to this idea now of ideating in different markets? So, like, now we know kind of how the team is structured, right? You're pulling people and creating teams in-house that have kind of centralized focuses on these markets. Tell me about how they ideate. And then I want to get into kind of some of the major differences that you're seeing kind of tactically as well.
It depends on the market, but I would say it's still the same. It won't still the same thing across all markets. Relevancy is key. So whenever we get like a specific brand for a specific region, we would ideally have a native in-house, and then we start ideating by following their guidelines. So it would be anything around cultural differences, language differences, even time zone differences. And then we'll just pick our specific topics and then follow the niche of the industry. So relevance stays the same throughout everything. But I would say the key difference is language. Like we do tend to create topics that actually translate well, because we might have a UK brand that wants to crack on, like enter the German market, example, but it needs to be translated in a way that the actual consumers in this country understand it. So it starts with a really basic overview. Relevance, we analyze the media landscape, we check the audience of our brand, their competitors, and then we just speak to natives and we analyze their feedback.
And you touched on this idea of translation. I know that can be a big thing. So are these typically native speakers? I guess, Libby, if you want to speak to this, like, are the teams native speakers in these areas so that they know exactly how to pitch and when it comes to writing?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything's done within the native language. So the on-site blog, if it's like an on-site campaign, the press releases, the actual outreach pictures are all done within the native language and within those markets that we are kind of outreaching in.
Have you tried, or do you recommend as an alternative, like, is this doable for people who don't have native speakers to use like a translation tool for pitching or for,
Yeah.
ideating, like that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think it is possible. Of course it is. Obviously, we're not experts in every single market out there. But I think to see, yes, it is possible to answer your question, but to see real success, do you believe that you need those natives in-house to be able to build that content, translate that content? Because it doesn't even come down just to translation. It's the language that you use, the tone of voice. Each market's completely different. And we're not going to know that for that specific market, whereas the natives are going to know that. So I think that is really important.
I would say it's more possible if I have to pinpoint the actual line of getting coverage using AI, whatever Google Translate, is how niche your pitch is. So let's say you have an exclusive from, let's say you have an interview with an athlete. And even if you used AI translation and pitched it to a really relevant publication in German, and they can see that you translated it quite, but they get what you mean, and they get the exclusive. I do think you're going to get the result, but would you build a relationship with this publication, this journalist? I don't think so. Unless you have direct communication with specific athlete, that's quite niche, but that's the only way I can see it happening long term if you use AI.
Right. And the story has to lead it. It sounds like if it's not an interesting story, you're still going to strike out.
I think one other thing to mention is actually on your question, Vince, when you are kind of building an international team and you've got those kind of native experts per market, there's a lot of crossover, especially across European markets, isn't there? So, for example, we've got a fantastic French team, and we've also got experience across the Spanish market. So, whilst we may not have a Spanish PR lead as an example, we have got those French execs leads that have got experience of the Spanish market. So then at that point, they're able to jump in and support on that market. And we find that there's a lot of similarities, a lot of crossover. So that's another way kind of around that I would suggest.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, let's get into some of the tactical stuff. I'm really, really keen on understanding kind of some of the differences that you've seen in the different markets, in the different regions, different countries. Do you have anything that stands out? Eirini, let's start with you.
I think once I was thinking about this, to be fair, most of the times what I say to people is the working culture. So I'll say Europe as an example. There's I know journalists in general, and I think everyone will agree with me, they have a really competitive work schedule. And there's really competitive for them to get in a big national, get all the exclusives out, all hit all their KPIs and things like that. And I think that relates to every country. And all media landscapes are quite the same. They work at the same pace. But there's some key differences in countries that we've noticed in the past. I think I've been doing EU outreach, for example, for the past 4 years. There's so many different aspects of how journalists work per country. For example, if I were to pitch um, to Greece, for example, on a Friday, I will get not even maybe a link later in the day, but I would get a response perhaps on a Sunday. It's quite common for people to work their own hours. But if I were to pitch that in a Scandinavian country, even if it's time sensitive, something that's really relevant to the country, something's happening right now, they won't pick it up. It's highly unlikely that they'll pick it up because they're really strict on their schedule. And also that translates well with a time frame from pitch to an article. Even if I know they're going to be covering it because I have a relation with them or it's really relevant to them, I know there's so many different time frames in per country, even though as a continent, Europe is not as big, let's say, as the US, but they have so many differences in how they work, when do they actually log off, how strict they are with the timelines. Even if they work for a national or region, doesn't matter. Compared to the UK, I know that if there was a really relevant pitch and I were to pitch it to journalists in the metro, and it's really competitive for them, they don't want anyone else to get it, I would get a reply to a German journalist, for example. But that's the key difference I highlight on every I guess conversation around.
Yeah, Libby, how about you? Have you seen any specific trends?
In terms of kind of outreach in the campaigns and getting.
Yeah, I mean, difference. I guess what I'm looking for is like if somebody were to listen to this who's thinking about doing it, I think a lot of it is this mindset of like, how do we scale this stuff? What is one size fits all versus, what more do I have to kind of tweak based off of the different countries. So understanding some of those trends, if they even exist. Like I remember somebody telling me, certain countries like really data led stuff. We had someone from Australia on our podcast, and she said, you really have to get in and speak to the PRs one-on-one. Like it's kind of more of a traditional thing. Like you have to go and have coffee with them versus like emailing them. So yeah, it just kind of trends like that, I guess, is what I'm thinking about.
Well, when it comes to international, at the end of the day, it's still PR and the PR fundamentals still apply. So I think the trend that is the same across each and every single market is that you still have to have your relevance in your pitch to the journalists that you're pitching to. So why is it relevant to them? Why is it relevant to the audience, the market, and the publication? That still applies to whatever market you're operating and outreaching across. The data methodology as well as PRs, again, no matter what market you're operating in, you are still responsible to make sure that your data is accurate. So you sense check your numbers and what data you kind of providing to the journalist, and that you're making sure your methodologies and your sources are super clear. That still applies. So those are the two key main trends, and I think it's just important to state that it's still PR, no matter what market you're outreaching in. And then as PRs, we still have a duty to make sure that we're sending relevant content and we're sense checking everything. I think, yeah, creating those journalist relationships, like you said, remains key. So I think as in some European markets, let's say in the UK, you might ever so often pick up the phone. It's not as common nowadays as what it was way back when, but across European markets in the US, you probably do. We don't do that anymore. So there are a few differences, but I think still creating those journalist kind of relationships is definitely key as well.
It's varies. It's quite a generalization, but I would say European or even smaller countries, they do appreciate feel good stories more than the US. I find
Yeah.
most of my scaremongery pitches do well in the US or in the UK, but the one perform in Australia, the one perform well in like smaller European countries. Also depends on the niche, but as a generalization, we definitely notice like feel good pitches tend to get more.
And I think this isn't really a trend, but one thing we were speaking about earlier on is that some markets are still backwards in terms of digital PR. So they're still not quite aware of what it is. So, for example, in the UK or the US, you can send an outreach pitch. The journalist knows what you're referring to and they'll cover it. There are some markets, especially across Europe, where digital PR is still
They're
not a
asking,
widely known thing. So we found that in some markets, we've got to really kind of explain our story to a journalist in kind of dummy term and kind of explain to them what it is we're sending to them, why it's relevant, and what we want them to do with that story. You put it on your website, link the brand mentioned. So you've got to be really clear with it because we've had a lot of response on certain markets where people have gone, "What is this?" or "What do you mean?" So I think that's
Yeah.
interesting how some markets are still a little bit behind, not backwards.
Right. Yeah. It's funny as you say that. I do remember this was more blogger outreach, I guess, when I started. And, like the small blogs you're trying to get links from, and they would be like, "Oh, this is really cool. What do you want me to do with it?" You're like, yeah, like that is interesting. Eirini, you going back to the kind of the finding that you had about kind of understanding the schedules and kind of like the nuance. Is this just kind of trial and error? Like how do you recognize some of these things?
I would say, yeah, even like I'm from Greece. I never pitched to Greek journalists growing up. Like I didn't know how it worked, but I understand the nuances and even the smaller details like holidays, different holidays, even per region, different bank holidays and cultural differences, even language. I mean, yes, Greece is a smaller country, but talking to our German team, I've learned that there's so many different language differences across the DACH region system. So that is definitely something you do have to try a lot of things to get it right, but there's some things that you don't really, I won't ever be able to learn those things and understand those things because I'm not from there. So I fear yeah, you do need an aider to make it like long-term successful as a PR strategy, but you can definitely trial and error and find out yourself, even in countries that don't really have a little PR heavy pitches, let's say most European countries, it's definitely worth reaching out asking, when do you pitch to your publisher to send you a research on X, Y, Z? Because I know you're covering X, Y, Z. Yeah, I think there's still a plethora of countries that we haven't tapped into, but you can definitely do the trial and error system, but
Yeah.
you won't be able to find meaningful relationships with the publications, the journalists, because we do, change.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. This kind of leads into this question I was going to kind of save to the end, but like, I feel like this is probably a good time to, if you were starting from scratch on this, right? Like if there's listeners who are thinking about doing this, let's start with you, Libby, like the, building a team, like, let's say, like, what are common pitfalls potentially that and now that you've done this for a bit, like, what are pitfalls? How would you start? Yeah, walk me through that a little bit. Then I want to get into kind of like the content ideation and thinking through some of that stuff.
Yeah, of course. I think I'll start with where I would start if I was to start again. I think defining your proposition and like your niche values. So what kind of areas you're kind of an expert in and what you can leverage, that would be the key thing. And understanding what markets I'm going to target and operate in first, i.e. the ones that I know me and my team have got expertise in and we can absolutely dominate from day one. I think as well, another thing I would do if I was to start from scratch would be to build a core team. So build a strong team with like your managers, your strategists, and your execs, and not just rely on one or two people to do everything because that's going to then lead to burnout. People are going to leave. Clients aren't going to be happy. So you need your core delivery team again with experience, what those markets that you're going to operate in.
And Libby, sorry to interrupt, the execs, managers, and what was the
That's
third?
an example, like strategists. So having a core delivery team. So you
Yeah. Can you break down kind of like what each of those does, just so
yeah,
people can?
absolutely. So executives, they would be, your kind of junior PRs, entry-level PRs who are just brilliant at taking your campaign content, taking your research, forming these fantastic press releases and outreaching them to the media. So they're the ones that are kind of speaking to the journalists, pitching your stories and getting you the results basically to then build those case studies to go after new business. And then you've got your strategists who are just amazing at building a strategy. So knowing what your clients' goals are, what they're wanting to achieve. And then from that, building that PR strategy and then working with the execs to kind of distribute that to the media. And then your managers, you need people to manage a team. You need people to kind of carve your team, to progress them, to upskill them, to teach them the ropes. So they would be the three key hires that I would have if I was starting from scratch. Because I think sometimes you can rely on all of this within one person, and we're only human, we can't do everything. So that's my biggest tip. And then I think as well, one thing maybe we're all guilty of doing is that not being very process driven. And I think developing core processes from the start before you get too busy. And then you're like, oh, because we know when you built a team,
Yeah.
introducing processes
It's
once
so
you're in the
hard.
rhythm of things, it's
Yeah.
so hard because we're all creatures of habit.
Yeah.
To try to teach someone something new when they've done something for so long, it takes more
Yeah.
time than not. So having your processes nailed from the start as well would be um my biggest things that I would do. So yeah, value proposition in a knowing your niche, building a core team to deliver. So you're not just relying on one person because they will burn out. And then absolutely nailing your processes from the start. And I think another one as well would be having your proof of concept client. So if you're wanting to
Mm.
target a specific market, so let's say, I don't know, France as an example, starting with a client and sector that your team can dominate and get results quick. Because then once you've done that, you've got your case study, your success story that you can go out and get new business with.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, the only thing I would add is in an ideal world, if you could have feet on the ground, immerse yourself into the culture for however long, even with the natives, even have the natives there, if possible, for however long time. Or if you even have a brand, let's say for France, for example, that's already there, because obviously in order to work with you, they might not have an SEO team, they might not have done PR before. So it's you definitely have a lot to learn. If you will speed up the process of actually getting success by being there, it's not ideal, obviously, to create a new agency in every single country. But if you can immerse yourself even from afar by reading the news and subscribing to newsletters and even learning the language, as simple as that, get on Duolingo, understand why you're pitching. That's something I would add.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Do you have then, I guess, Eirini, from your standpoint, if when it comes to building content from scratch, building a content strategy, can you talk through maybe some starting points, some pitfalls, some mistakes that you made along the way, that sort of thing?
Definitely, it's not one size fits all. And I do think we all, as PRs, we have done the spray and pray method before, especially starting from the old days back in the just doing UK PR and link building. It was definitely more not just quality pitching and creating content, but just a bit more number side. So I would say starting from the national point of view, the content before you do anything, I would say understanding the market, creating a wish list of publications you want to be featured on, and then work backwards, see whether publishing, even if it's not PR studies, because some countries obviously they don't have enough PR pitches sent to them, but understand how they format their articles, what type of data they do include, if they do include, speak with your natives, and understand what type of content would perform better. Let's say you have the finance industry to focus on what type of content. Would it be expert commentary? Would it be interviews? Would it be reacting to perhaps market news, or would it be a data-led story? And then I would start ideating. I would say it's perfect to have a bit of a all-round strategy throughout any PR strategy. Like it's better to have your data-led pieces, but also have some backup of proactive pieces that you can just easily pitch to the media whenever there's something relevant in this market. But the core content strategy would be sitting down with your natives, understand the media landscape, get a wish list of few publications that you want to target, and then create your content. The main pitfall I see all the time is a lot of index pieces, which we know works. We know it works throughout like different, especially lifestyle topics, but it has died down. And I do think that more and more, especially not native brands, keep doing them just because it's what we know. I don't think we should eliminate them from all ideation sessions for internationals, but ideally, we need to do like a global approach. I've seen that term going around. If you were to do that, it's like global and local together. You need to take into consideration the whole country or the whole region or the whole state, but make sure you understand the nuances a bit more zoomed in into the regions. It could be areas in a state. It could be regions in specific countries, let's say in Europe, or cities or capitals or metro areas across like key countries you focus on, instead of just local generalizing and doing just a local approach of, well, this country ranks X and then X, Y, and Z. It might help drive links to the beginning, but it won't really crack the surface and make sure you are being reached out by journalists with more topics if they need content for publication. But I would say it's definitely getting a lot of knowledge of the market, more local knowledge, what works, what doesn't, what people actually read about. Where do they even read the news? Each country is different.
Yeah. So I'm so glad you brought up the city index thing. I had a note here as we were talking earlier. I was like, is this just an index play? Because you've seen so many of those. It's the top countries, top whatever regions, and then you break it in the U.S. You break it down the states. You break it down in the cities. But yeah, have felt that way for a while now. That is kind of getting played out, and I've spoken to some journalists too, and they're like, I can't, it's a mix of like they're getting inundated with pitches that have nothing to do with them anyway, so they're like kind of burnt out on that. But like for the ones who still get them, they're like, okay, there's only so many times our city can be listed on a whatever,
Yes.
So what else is there? How do you recommend breaking away from some of that?
I would answer for you to jump in. I would answer with a question because I've had this debate for so long in the past 2.5 years. Like everyone, it's been going on and on, every conference, every talk, and I'm guilty of saying this as well. But we keep doing that because it works. The question is why consumers scroll and stop for those articles? Why there is a need of people finding out where their city rank in some random. The worst thing I've seen recently is that the city smelling the best. I would scroll, and if I were to see that my hometown is #1 best smelling city in the world, I would click on it. I would
It's
read it.
clickbait stuff,
It
that,
is
isn't it?
clickbait,
It's,
but why
it's even called clickbait stories.
That's the thing. Like, I get why we create them, and I get why journalists do still pick them up. Not as often as they used to be, but I think I don't think they're going anywhere, to answer your question. I'm not sure they're going to go extinct, like the drink jog campaign, which maybe you find the odd one, like going around. But I do think that the more niche the topic and the more relevant and more localized approach you get with your index, the better to create credibility, obviously, to make sure you have a credible and valuable pitch and send it to only specific journalists that you know that actually maybe they're in this city, maybe they follow in this niche and they just talk about this industry if it's an industry focused index pitch. But you won't find the best countries to retire going around for so long, but you won't find the best areas to raise a family in a metropolitan, like make it even more and more
Yeah.
because to bring value.
And I think as well, the best place to retire, I mean, we did that in 2020, like 6 years ago. So that's how old those kind of campaigns are on an international scale. But I think for most, I think there is still a place for index style campaigns. But you're right, they are kind of a bit more old school, but we're seeing a lot of successes at the moment from interviews. So especially across the kind of sporting sector, the lifestyle sector, whereby we'll be interviewing sports stars and trending topics, celebrities, influencers, etc. So we're seeing a lot of success from that. As well as utilising our clients' internal data to form stories. Now, I know not a lot of brands will or they can't use their internal data, but that is something we found to be a huge success if we can use our, if there's things going on across the media or kind of awareness days, etc. Obviously more important awareness days. I don't mean kind of National Donut Day, etc.
That's enough. You would see, and even to the day, not as often, you would see pieces on World Donut Day and the best days for a donut, whatever, those types of content to be picked up in the US.
But not across
But
Europe.
even if you do try this for something really niche, like a World
Happiness Day or
whatever, something niche to the actual European country, that won't get picked up at all because that was really big back in 2021. Those awareness days in the US and that went everywhere. Obviously, it was mostly lifestyle topics, but that hasn't happened at all. Like even back in 2021, 2022 in Europe or Australia, I've not seen World Awareness Days more on the lifestyle side getting picked up in those countries. So that's a cultural difference.
But it is more what we are seeing is utilising our clients' brands' internal data is key.
Yeah.
It's on-site content. A lot of the time we find that brands, especially across an international scale, are setting a goldmine of on-site content that they're doing nothing with or reports. So then a lot of time we'll leverage that and perform PR stories that will then distribute to the media. That's really successful. Reactive newsjacking across some European markets still dominates. And then even surveys, so survey-led stories where we're surveying like 2,000, 2,500 plus respondents. That still works. So we've always done that across the UK and the US, but we do find that works again across European markets, so Spain, France, Italy, Germany. So that's another tactic that we see successes from.
I think the trial and error thing, back to what you were saying on the surveys, that would be the representative sample. You would find some European markets, regardless of population, they're so strict with the samples they would accept the claim.
right.
Because we've seen some campaigns that have like 1,000 respondents across the US, which is 50 different countries. And you would think this story is backed up by a survey. Obviously, you could never have enough people to back up your claim, but you find other countries that they're like 10 million, except for 10K, for example.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I would wonder, well, so let me ask you this. Say somebody's starting and wants to expand from, say, the UK, right? Our listeners who are wanting to expand from the UK. Give me like a starter package in terms of like, where would you go first? If you had your pick, where would you go first and what would you kind of lean into in terms of the content type? If you wanted to be super successful, do you have a sense for this? Arena, you go first.
Where would you go, like market wise?
Sorry, so where would you go market wise, and then what kind of content would you kind of lean into? An ideal world.
The most fertile environment right now is Europe. Like for UK, depending on the industry, I guess, but it's such an untapped territory when it comes to PR, for example. So potentially that will make sense for next. I would definitely delve into the European market.
And like you said as well, I think it needs to depend on
Yeah.
where the brand are wanting to kind of
Mm.
build on their presence and where they've got actual products to sell within that market. You
Right,
don't just
right.
want to launch random in a
Just jump
market.
in. Yeah.
Yeah, so it needs to be based on business focus as well, like you said,
For
definitely.
sure. For sure.
You
Right.
have a service that they can use in all the European markets,
Yeah.
like all countries. Let's say it's an online service, like travel fair. You can compare travel fair, so that's something that everyone can purchase from their
Yeah.
site. I would definitely go to Europe, and I would start. As we said, like immersing to each market. I wouldn't crack Europe as a whole. I would definitely choose perhaps whatever market makes more sense financially, and then talking to their cultural nuances, finding my natives, building a strong team, and then understanding why is in this region have if they have any link building strategies, why it works, why it works, where they're getting links, and then building my strategy.
Yeah. Libby, how about you?
Yeah, I think I would do the absolute same. I'd choose a market based on the business's focuses and where they're wanting to take their presence and their products. And then from that, I'd work backwards. So I would do my research on the market. I would make sure I've got a team in-house. If I haven't got a team in-house, lean on freelancers to do kind of the consumer research, the market research, what's getting picked up by the media, and then working with a client to understand what their core focuses are. So are they launching a particular product? Are they wanting to focus on a particular category on their website? And then from that, I would form my strategy and my ideas around their core focuses and then go from there. I think as well, if it was a new market, whereby we didn't have lots of expertise, I think another way around it would be maybe looking into marketing or PR agencies that already kind of
Interesting. Yeah.
market. Because then what you can do is you can take their website, because a lot of them will have their portfolio or case studies, and then you can see what the agency in that market has done for other brands, and then you can kind of take a little bit of sneaky inspo and then incorporate that into the brand that you're wanting to work with in that market.
And then maybe get some journalists for a coffee if possible.
Yeah. I love it. I love the strategic approach to this. I set that up I kind of as a softball question, but I feel like the answer that I keep hearing from you both is there is no one size fits all, right? It's never going to depend. It's always going to depend on the specific country, their nuances, the timelines. Um, I want to be cognizant of your time here. I know we're kind of getting over. I think the last thing I wanted to ask is the idea of kind of keeping up with the trends in the different markets, right? So like for something, an agency like C3, like you're in a lot of different countries. I mean, you have your specific teams. Is it the same tools that we're using, Google Trends, the social listening tools, or does it depend on the different countries?
I think the trend
Yeah, go ahead.
apply. The trends definitely still apply. So social listening, Google Trends, setting up Google Alerts, that is absolutely still applies. But I think we were saying earlier on about
Used to do French. Obviously, wasn't part of a specific French brand. It's an untapped territory. But what I used to do, and I keep doing, whenever we have a new market, perhaps focus for one of our brands, I do subscribe to the equivalent of BBC newsletter for that region, just to get, because they do have a lot of English newsletters for key general news, yes, but you would, I wouldn't go on X and change my VPN to Germany to get the trending news for the day in Germany. But it does help to subscribe to newsletters, the equivalent of your BBC. And you even have industry newsletters for a specific country because they're big enough. Like, let's say you're in the finance industry. And then I would definitely create Google alerts or even Bustering alerts. Bustering alerts if I have a mention of a brand, which is a key competitor, one of my brands, just to make sure I get everywhere they're mentioned, everywhere people talk about them or social listening tool, I would see what they see. And you can easily translate that with your emails, and you can find what people are talking about, what journalists are covering. And then in an ideal world, I'll have time to scroll through TikTok, for example, and then find trending news in that region, and then get some ideas from it if I have to add data.
And I think, like you said, it's PR at the end of the day. We should all be reading the news.
Yeah.
So if we are operating in certain markets, we should be reading the news within those markets to understand what's going on across market, across consumers. So, for example, on my way into work, I might be reading, the BBC, whereas obviously Eirini might be reading a Greek publication. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's key. So no matter what market you're operating in, you should be familiar with trending news stories
You can
within that
find,
market.
you can find all the information you need online.
Yeah, of
especially
course
if
you
you cut back the time, just subscribing to newsletters and creating trends. You will definitely get information in your inbox or in your phone and things like that. But what would native, on the other hand, would offer you is the time frame is way shorter. For example, we had a travel piece around airfare, things like that, and launched like a few months ago, like I think earlier in 2025, and then I think in January there was a airspace blackout in Greece, and obviously the moment it happened, I found out it was a big news, a big European country. There's flights affected from all around the world. They're flying to Greece, so that was relevant to global media. But it just happened in Greece moments like after I found out, and then I re-angled and pitched this new angle to the media across those different regions and Greece, and that helped us get more coverage. But you would get this information if Greece was your market, for example. You would already subscribe to perhaps travel alerts on Google for a specific region, or even use, let's say, for a publication, a major publication in Greece, but you wouldn't be able to find it like ASAP as it was happening. And you just get the time frame. Sure.
Yeah. I think what our team's really good doing is we've got a newsroom Teams chat that we use daily. And like I'd say pretty much all the time, the team are posting in like trends or trending news stories that they're seeing across the globe. And that's really interesting as well, because as well, they're like, hey, have you seen this? Could this work as a reactive art for this client or this brand? So the team are really, really good at doing that as well, especially across international.
Now, like Black Friday, for example, it's huge in the US. And the moment we had like some Black Friday, like news tracking ideas in the chat, in the European type of, in the European part of our international team, that wasn't really like a big thing. That I was asking some German people from our team, and that's not something they would pitch. I would pitch an increase because I grew up in all of US culture, and everything that the US, even the English, I was taught it was US English. Everything that has to do with US culture is so big in Greece. But you see like bigger countries in Europe, like Germany, they couldn't care less. Every Monday is it's not a thing there. But it is smaller countries like Greece. But you would know that. You could.
Yeah. I love that newsroom Teams chat. You're definitely not the first agency to talk about that. And I even remember back in the day with Siege Media trying to set something up like that. I think it was Patty Mugen at Era who put out a post about that was getting shared around. So we're coming up on time. The last thing I always like to ask is just like a quick, what didn't I ask you that you think is important in this topic? What didn't we cover? B, let's start with you. Is there anything specific that you want people to kind of be left with in this topic?
I think from my perspective, it's around building an international team. And I think it's so important as managers, directors, head of, whoever's responsible for building and growing this team and seeing the success is just understanding that once you start building an international team, you're hiring people from a diverse range of cultural backgrounds. They all communicate differently, they all work differently. So I think one thing that is just so important, and my biggest piece of advice would be to make sure that you are speaking and communicating and getting to know your team one on one to understand how they work, how they communicate, and then you can kind of adapt your management style to reflect that. Because the more you support and you work alongside your team and you communicate with them how they want to be communicated with, and you give them the feedback, how they like to receive the feedback, I think that forms a really strong culture and a good connection. And I think that is key for success. Because at the end of the day, if your team are happy and they feel supported and fulfilled at work, they're going to do a good job, like in return across their accounts. So I think that would be key from my
Yeah.
perspective.
I would say for me, it's more or less the same, but tapping into leaning on the people, obviously that working with to find out and learn from them, and especially if you were to hire people that are better, especially when it comes to tapping into different markets and understanding what you can offer different brands in those markets, like lean on your people. I'm a great example of that. Like they since I joined, like as an exec, like I was trusted to lead with my international background on different projects in order to learn from the team and teach them from my perspective what could work and what couldn't. So leaning on your people and understanding obviously what you can offer from their capabilities to different brands and crack on different markets. That's the key thing, because again, as Libby said, people buy from people.
Absolutely. And I think on that, like you were saying as well, is if you've already got a UK team as an example and you build an international team, don't forget about your UK team. Make sure your skills are transferable. So, for example, make sure you're educating your UK team on your international presence and kind of getting your international team to kind of upskill the UK team. Because at the end of the day, we want a team that have all got transferable skills. So I think that's really important as well because it gives you bigger business buy-in. So that would be another key. Make sure you're kind of upskilling the entire PR department.
Yeah, such great advice. Libby, Eirini, this has been super, super eye-opening, and I think will be very helpful for a lot of our listeners. I know we went a little extra here. Your lights are turning off behind you. We're really closing down the shop here, but I appreciate the extra time. I know our listeners do. Is LinkedIn the best place for people to connect with you if they have any questions about this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Awesome. And definitely check out Connective 3, their website, their work. They do fantastic work. I will link to all this stuff in the show notes. Big thank you again to Libby and Eirini for hanging out with me today. And just another reminder to like, subscribe, and share this stuff if you have any questions about this stuff. I'm sure Libby and Eirini would be more than happy to answer. So leave in the comments and, engage with this stuff. Engage with the community is very open in digital PR. So thank you again, both of you. Have a fantastic day. Good luck out there, listeners. And let's take it international. Let's go.
Yeah.